On July 28, 1976, a small city in northern China named Tangshan was struck by a catastrophic 7.8 magnitude earthquake that resulted in more than 240,000 people dead and 160,000 people wounded. After this horrible disaster, a Chinese medical team conducted a survey on the survivors of the 1976 earthquake. Most of the survivors were hit by the debris and buried under the wreckage. More than half of the survivors remember that while they were buried, they experienced a sense of peace, unusually vivid thoughts, and no sense of panic. They reported seeing a rapid thought image of many clips, like a movie from their past showing joyful moments, happy childhood memories, scenes of getting married, job promotions, and rewards, among other things. Miss Leo, who was 23 years old at the time, was knocked out by a collapsed house that crushed her spine. Consequently, she would never walk again. Recalling her near-death experience, she said, "My consciousness was vivid. Some happy moments ran like a revolving lantern as they flashed before me. I remember merrily playing with my childhood friends, dating my boyfriend, and getting a merit at work." Interestingly, nearly half of the NDEs experienced a separation of consciousness or souls from their body, feeling the self had left their physical body. They emphasized their consciousness existed outside of their body in another dimension, instead of dwelling in their brain. Some even reported that they were floating up in mid-air over their body or looking down from the ceiling while watching their body. Approximately 1/3 of the experiencers traveled through an area like a cave or a tunnel. Sometimes this situation would be accompanied by noises or a sensation of being pulled or squeezed. A light would appear in this tunnel, one they gravitated towards, like a magnet. One person recorded, "A wind was fiercely blowing sand around, but I was alone in this solitude. Where should I go?" While I was wondering where to go, a dark black hole emerged. I was not afraid of it and walked into the cavern inside where water splashed and ripples everywhere, walking endlessly until it seemed there was a light illuminated from afar. I ran briskly out of it to see the daylight. About 1/4 of people who took the survey were met by non-human forms or spiritual beings. Some people described the spirits as brilliance, whereas others thought the beings to be religious figures. Mr. Lee, one of the survivors in the Tangshan Earthquake, remembered his NDE. "My whole body was detached from me. Lower limbs had disappeared. Up in the air, my body parts were scattered. Then I plunged at a high speed into an abyss where I was surrounded by darkness. I was baffled by a noise that was hard to explain. I heard it consistently for half an hour. Then I experienced a brief life review. I saw the events presented as a stream of consciousness, yet not controlled by the brain." The surveyor summarized that among all the survivors, there are 81 cases that have been validated and categorized them with 40 types of elements. This includes a life review, separation of the consciousness from the body, weightlessness, alienation to their physical body, eccentric sensations, integration with the universe, and cessation of time. The majority of experiencers experienced at least 2 or more of these sensations. According to the survivors of the Tangshan Earthquake study, although only 81 incidents were verified, it is the largest scale sample of near-death experiences in the world. And it has pretty big implications for what we think life's meaning is and what might wait for us on the other end. Near-death experiences are really nothing new. History holds numerous reports of this phenomenon dating back as far as ancient Greece and even Egypt. For instance, in Plato's Republic, the philosopher describes a soldier named who returns from the dead and shares his experience, which includes elements such as a life review, encounters with deceased relatives, and the option to return to life. Similarly, the ancient Egyptians and Tibetans believed in an afterlife and documented the phenomenon in their texts, such as the Egyptian Book of the Dead and the Tibetan Book of the Dead. It's not a little-known fact that Egyptian hieroglyphics often depict a journey of the deceased through a tunnel or cavern towards a light, echoing elements commonly reported in NDEs today. A lot of reports of celestial visions and divine encounters were seen as proof of an afterlife and offered reassurance to believers during the time. Flash forward a few centuries and NDEs start gaining a religious interpretation. For example, the monk Bede, in his Ecclesiastical History of England, completed in 731, describes Drothelm's vision. Drothelm died one evening in AD 696 of a severe illness, yet revived in the morning to report meeting a man, quote, "of shining countenance and bright apparel." who led him through an enormous valley. One side was filled with flames while the other side had hail and snow. As Drithom observed tortured souls being thrown from side to side, his guide explained that this is a temporary situation and that these individuals could be released through masses, prayers, alms, and fasts, performed by the living on their behalf. Later, Drithom saw hell a bottomless stinking pit. When demons threatened him, his guide reappeared as a bright star. Together they traveled to a realm of clear light, saw a vast wall, and suddenly were on top of it. Beyond was a bright flowery meadow filled with happy people. Drithom thought he was in heaven, but was informed that this was a holding area for the slightly imperfect. The actual kingdom of heaven was filled with a far greater fragrance and light. After his return to his body, Drithom distributed his property, retired to a monastery, and began a life of devotion, austerity, fasting, and cold baths. Drithom's NDE was one of the many similar visions continuing through the mid-13th century, most of which contain the primary features of modern NDE reports. There is something interesting we see here with the difference between modern and medieval NDEs. Medieval accounts often seem to focus on hell, suffering, obstacles, tests, and doom generally, whereas modern accounts I've seen from the Near-Death Experience Research Foundation website, which contains thousands and thousands of NDE accounts, rarely contain scenes of hell and are much more optimistic, assuming progress. Religious scholar Carol Zaleski, in her book Otherworld Journeys, Accounts of Near-Death Experience in Medieval and Modern Times, claims that NDEs are strongly shaped by cultural influences and that they cannot accurately represent what occurs after death. This view has influenced other commentators or skeptics who believe the phenomenon is the result of neurological and psychological factors, shaped by culture. However, an opposing view is that aspects of mentality held in the subconscious mind, such as emotions, skills, preferences, and habits, carry over from one life to the next. Researcher James G. Matlock writes, "Subconscious processing also allows cultural and individual ideas and expectations to influence material presented to conscious awareness. This, I think, explains variations in NDE and IE phenomenology, in particular why supernatural beings and similar rules are perceived in dissimilar but culturally appropriate ways by different experiencers." Often people will attempt to describe NDEs in ways that they themselves say cannot be explained in words. So they use words that they commonly know in their cultural context to explain things that are much bigger than them. So words like angel or heaven or hell will often be used because these are the words we know. However, someone raised differently may use different words to describe what is essentially the same idea. So often people who have these experiences will attempt to project their own meaning onto these experiences as a way to better understand them. However, everything is individual. Often these are individual recounts of these experiences. So attempting to put contextual meaning onto something that's much bigger than ourselves often results in confusion. And that's why I have a feeling that modern and medieval accounts are so different. Either because there was a loss in translation based on different historical contexts, where someone may attempt to project their own views onto an experience, and that got written down and repeated over the centuries. Or another theory hypothesized by those who experience NDEs themselves is that human consciousness is far more remarkable in terms of what it can do than previously thought. The details of what religious figure or realm seen doesn't matter nearly as much as the archetype and what it portrays. And those experiencing this often say that during their near-death experience, whatever they think often comes to fruition. So thinking dark thoughts, that they are rejected or are angry for whatever reason when they die, often get more darker or dreary near-death experiences. But I would say it's a lot more different now with modern NDEs because you can pretty much hear it straight from the horse's mouth. But that too, of course, comes with the unique views of the individual experiencer in that person's cultural context. The Enlightenment period saw a shift in NDE interpretations. Rationalism became more prevalent, attributing NDEs to physiological and psychological factors. Nonetheless, the 19th century brought forth influential figures who challenged this view. Benjamin Rush, an American physician, advanced the theory that NDEs were a result of decreased blood flow to the brain rather than supernatural experiences. More modern explanations would be that NDEs are caused by low oxygen levels in the blood, which have been hypothesized to induce hallucinations and hence possibly explain NDEs. These episodes are observed in fighter pilots experiencing very rapid and intense acceleration that result in lack of sufficient blood supply to the brain. Researcher Dr. James Winery studied almost 1,000 cases and noticed how the experiences often involved tunnel vision and bright lights, floating sensations, paralysis, vivid dreams of beautiful places, sensations of euphoria and disassociation, and the strong urge to understand the experience. However, acceleration-induced hypoxia's primary characteristics are rhythmic jerking of the limbs, difficulty recalling events once gaining consciousness, tingling of extremities, etc., that are not observed during NDEs. Also, these episodes do not feature life reviews, mystical experiences, and long-lasting transformational after effects. And it should be noted that hypoxic hallucinations are also characterized by distress and agitation, and this is very different from near-death experiences, which subjects report as being pleasant as a whole. Though NDEs have been occurring all throughout time, it wasn't until the 20th century that near-death experiences started to gain a lot more traction. Psychiatrist Raymond Moody played a crucial role in popularizing the term near-death experience in his book Life After Life, published in 1975. It was Moody's work that inspired numerous researchers to explore the topic further and pretty much laid the foundation for the modern study of NDEs. Another one of the significant contributors to NDE research is Dr. Kenneth Ring, a psychologist who extended the study of NDEs to a broader population and conducted interviews with NDE survivors. Ring categorized common elements of NDEs such as the sensation of leaving the body, encountering a bright light, and a life review. He also discovered that race, gender, age, education, marital status, religious orientation, or social class did not factor into who had an NDE or who didn't. All were equally susceptible to the experience. He also concluded from his research that NDEs tend to have similar elements of a clear, connected pattern. Most follow pretty much the exact same script of being outside of their bodies, of moving through a void or a dark tunnel toward a light, of meeting with deceased relatives or friends, of having a feeling of great comfort and bliss, and of being surrounded by compassionate love, and so on. Often when these experiencers return to the earthly realm, they were affected by this feeling the rest of their lives. Many reported a period of depression for various reasons, a few of them being the struggle to live after experiencing something so life-changing. Life here seems so difficult compared to life on the other side. Here it is full of suffering and hardship compared to what they experienced. Dr. Ring also concluded that the idea that these could be hallucinations didn't seem to add up for the simple fact that hallucinations are rambling, unconnected, often unintelligible, and very widely, whereas these NDEs often always contain these same elements, and are often reported as realer than real, not as a dream. Let us take the NDEs of the blind, for example. Vicki Winnipeg was born prematurely in 1951 with damaged optic nerves and an atrophied visual cortex in her occipital lobe. She's never seen anything. No light, no shadows, nothing. Not even black. In her dreams, she doesn't have visual impressions. Just taste, touch, sound, and smell. She's always been blind. In 1973, Vicki was left in a coma after a serious accident occurred which resulted in a skull fracture and concussion, and damage to her neck, back, and one leg. Vicki clearly remembers the terrifying crash itself, but not the direct events afterward. The next thing she knew, she was outside of her body, she recalls. The next thing I recall, I was in Harborview Medical Center and looking down at everything that was happening. And it was frightening because I'm not accustomed to seeing things visually, because I never had before. And initially it was pretty scary. And then I finally recognized my wedding ring and my hair. And I thought, is this my body down there? And am I dead or what? They kept saying, we can't bring her back. We can't bring her back. And then they were trying to frantically work on this thing that I discovered was my body. And I felt very detached from it and sort of, so what? And I was thinking, what are these people getting so upset about? And then I thought, I'm out of here. I can't get these people to listen to me. As soon as I thought that, I went up through the ceiling as if it were nothing. And it was wonderful to be out there and be free, not worrying about bumping into anything, and I knew where I was going. So what do we make of all this? Well, famous psychologist Carl Jung surmises it best, as he had what he described as his own near-death experience. In 1944, one day during the winter, he slipped on some ice and broke his foot. While he was in the hospital, he had a heart attack. Unresponsive for days, the doctors fought for his life. He says, "In a state of unconsciousness, I experienced deliriums and visions which must have begun when I hung on the edge of death and was being given oxygen and camphor injections. The images were so tremendous that I myself concluded that I was close to death. My nurse afterward told me, it was as if you were surrounded by a bright glow." That was a phenomenon she had sometimes observed in the dying, she added. "I had reached the outermost limit and did not know whether I was in a dream or an ecstasy. At any rate, extremely strange things began to happen to me." He goes on to explain, in short, that he was floating 1,000 miles above the Earth, taking in the amazing sights below and about to leave orbit. Then suddenly, a large dark block of granite with carved out entrances caught his attention. In one of the rock's entrances, Jung saw a Hindu man sitting in the lotus position on a stone bench, and he knew that the man was expecting him. As he neared the temple, he felt that everything artificial in his personality was being stripped away. All that remained was something he described as the essential Jung. Jung knew that within the temple, the ultimate mystery of his existence and life's purpose would be revealed. He was about to cross the threshold when he saw, rising up from Europe, far below, the image of his doctor in the archetypal form of the king of Kos, the island site of the temple of Asclepius, the Greek god of medicine. He told Jung that his departure was too early. Many were demanding his return, and it was time to go back. When Jung heard this, he was immensely disappointed, and almost immediately the vision ended. Jung would also recall the sting of disappointment at being brought back to Earth. He wrote, "Life and the whole world struck me as a prison. I had been so glad to shed it all." For 3 weeks, Jung found it difficult to take pleasure in life, but slowly over time, he began to take comfort in his visions, because locked within was a valuable lesson, which he called the collective unconscious. Jung believed the collective unconscious contained universal images which are eternal and which we all instinctively know. He called these images archetypes, and he claimed that he saw some of them during his near-death experience. For example, he believed the king of Kos represented his actual doctor, while the Hindu man was not only an archetype of his own higher self, but also the God image within us all. For the rest of his days, Jung would stress that his near-death experience came from something real and eternal. He wrote, "It was only after the illness that I understood how important it is to understand one's own destiny." Whether near-death experiences are real or not, we can't deny the good fruits of a good message. And that's what truly matters in the end, isn't it?